My husband said it on a Friday evening, over dinner, in front of his parents. Not quietly. Not in passing. He said it loudly enough for everyone to hear, right when his mother asked the question she had been asking, in one form or another, at every family dinner for the past 3 years. "Natasha, what do you do these days? Still staying at home?" Igor answered for me. Quickly. Confidently. With that casual tone people use when they are talking about something they consider completely obvious. "Mom, Natasha is a housewife. Just a housewife. She takes care of the house and the kids, that's all. Just a housewife." 2 words. I sat across from him with a meal I had cooked myself, in an apartment I kept in order myself, next to our children whom I had raised largely on my own while he traveled for business, and listened as 15 years of my life, and the 12 years before them, were reduced to 2 words. Just a housewife. I said nothing. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I knew there was no point saying it now, in this room, to these people. Because the words that were true would not fit into this dinner. Because the truth was larger than this table, these plates, and my mother-in-law's question, a question she asked not out of curiosity, but from a certain point of view. I picked up my fork and continued eating. The next day, the Ministry of Defense called. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to tell you what came before. Not because I need to justify myself. I don't. I want to tell it because Just a Housewife is a story that is far too easy to tell incorrectly, far too easy to turn into something it isn't, a story about a victim who was finally noticed, or a woman who needed someone else's recognition to know who she was. This is not that story. This is a story about 15 years of work that I chose consciously, that I did well, and that I never stopped doing simply because other people lacked the proper word for it. Let's start at the beginning. I'm 39 years old. I was born in Novosibirsk and grew up in the family of a military doctor. My father was a military surgeon, 23 years of service, 2 ranks earned. He never talked about work at the dinner table because there were things he simply couldn't discuss. But when he was home, he was truly home. The way he was present, quiet, precise, completely engaged in whatever room he happened to be in, was something I absorbed long before I learned how to describe it. I studied mathematics at Novosibirsk State University. Then applied mathematics in graduate school. After that, I worked for 3 years in a government structure whose name I won't specify because I shouldn't. I worked in a department that dealt with what it dealt with, and my responsibilities involved data analysis in a context that required a certain level of security clearance. Then I met Igor. Igor is a good man. I want to say that from the start because this story is not about a bad man. It's about a good man who, gradually, over the first 3 years of our marriage, began to see me through a particular frame, and stopped looking beyond it. When our first child was born, I took maternity leave. Then came our second child. Then we moved. Igor received a great opportunity in Moscow, and we relocated. I found myself without my old contacts, without my previous professional environment, in a new city with 2 young children. I took care of the children. I managed the household. And I did it well and with full attention, because that's how I do everything, with full attention. But I never stopped thinking. I never stopped reading. I never stopped following developments in my field. I never stopped doing what people with my education and my way of thinking simply cannot stop doing. I just stopped doing it in an official capacity. Igor didn't know that. Not because I was hiding it. Because it was mine. My way of remaining myself in the spaces between everything else. Just a Housewife saw things Igor never saw. The call came on Saturday at 10 in the morning. An unfamiliar Moscow number. At first I didn't recognize the area code. Then I did. My hands didn't shake. I'm not the kind of person whose hands shake because of an unfamiliar phone number. But I became slightly more attentive. I answered. Natalia Andreevna Karpova? Yes. This is Colonel Dmitriev from the main directorate. You were recommended to us as a specialist in data analysis with experience working in classified government structures. Are you available to talk right now? Igor was in the next room. I could hear him typing. He often worked from home on Fridays and Saturdays whenever there was a deadline. The children had been staying with their grandmother since Thursday. Yes, I said. I'm listening. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. I stood by the kitchen window, looking down into the courtyard while I spoke. An elderly woman was walking her dachshund. 2 boys were kicking a soccer ball. 22 minutes. When the conversation ended, I set my phone down on the table. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee. Then I returned to the window. What they offered me, I can describe only to the extent that I'm allowed. A consulting project. Classified, with the appropriate level of clearance, the same level I had before. It had never been revoked, only inactive. Analytical work involving large data sets. A specialized context. Specific objectives. Specific deadlines. Partly remote, partly on-site, twice a month, sometimes more. I had been recommended by someone I worked with 10 years earlier. He remembered me. I didn't know he remembered me. That is important. They didn't find me because I was looking for them. They found me because the work I had done 10 years earlier had left a mark in certain places, a mark that does not disappear simply because someone takes maternity leave and moves to Moscow. Some things don't disappear. That was one of them. I said I would think about it. Not because I doubted the opportunity. Because decisions of that magnitude deserve at least one night of reflection, not because I needed someone else's opinion. Because I needed a clear mind and a quiet room. Colonel Dmitriev said I had a week. I replied, 2 days will be enough. Igor was sitting in his office when I walked in. He looked up from his laptop. It was his work expression, slightly distracted, slightly tense, the expression of someone living in several contexts at once and switching between them slowly. The Ministry of Defense called, I said. What? He hadn't fully switched gears yet. The Ministry of Defense, I repeated. They offered me a consulting project. He stared at me for several seconds. You? Me. But you're. He stopped. Just a housewife? I asked. I said it calmly. Not as an accusation. Not as an attack. Simply as a question to which both of us now had an answer. Igor closed his laptop. That was a significant gesture. He rarely closed it in the middle of a workday. Tell me, he said. And so I did. Not everything, I couldn't tell him everything. But everything I was allowed to tell. I told him about graduate school. About those 3 years in that government structure. About the security clearance that remains active until officially revoked. About the person who remembered me, Igor Zolasangas, Hikoining Kalgan Kismani Hem YouTube Yukon Tabi Va Professional Inglise Tilida Davam Edarib Tarjima Kilab Baraman. The person who recommended me hadn't mentioned me by name, only by context. He described the work I had done. The kind of thinking required. The kind of results that leave a lasting impression. He listened. Really listened. I could tell by the way he sat. Not with half his attention elsewhere. Not with a response already prepared. He listened. When I finished, he was silent for a while. Then he said, "You never told me any of this." "You never asked," I replied. Not harshly. Just accurately. He accepted that. Not immediately, but eventually. "Why?" he asked at last. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I had thought about that question, not then. I had been thinking about it since the day we met. Because I don't build my identity from what other people know about me, I said. I build it from what I do. Your knowledge of who I used to be is nice. But it's not what holds the structure together. He looked at me for a long moment. Just a housewife, he repeated quietly. Yes. I didn't mean. I know you didn't mean everything that phrase carries, I said. You meant what you saw. You saw part of the picture. The mistake was deciding that the part you saw was all there was. Igor stood up and walked to the window. He stood with his back to me, looking down at the street. "Are you going to do it?" he asked. "Take the project?" "Yes." "Good," he said. And there were several layers inside that single word. I heard all of them. My mother-in-law called on Sunday. Not because she knew about the phone call, she didn't. She called because she always called on Sundays, to talk to Igor and, as a secondary matter, to talk to me. Igor handed me the phone. "Natasha, how are you?" came the familiar voice. "Tamara Nikolaevna. 63 years old. A retired accountant. A woman with a precise and efficient mind that, for reasons I never understood, she never seemed to apply to the subject of her daughter-in-law." "I'm well, Tamara Nikolaevna," I said. "It's been an interesting week." "Oh," she said politely. "I've been offered a consulting project," I said. "I'll be working again." A pause. Working? It wasn't quite the surprise of someone who didn't expect it. It was the surprise of someone whose worldview suddenly had nowhere to put a new piece of information. "Yes," I said. "Analytics. Serious work." "Well, that's nice," she said after another pause. The tone people use when they aren't entirely sure whether something is good or bad, but politeness requires a response. "Very nice," I agreed. We spoke for a few more minutes about the children. Then she said goodbye. A few minutes later she called Igor back. I could hear his voice from the next room, quiet, even. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. When he came out, I looked up from my book. "She asked if it was true," he said. "And what did you tell her?" "That it was. That you're a serious professional, and that I should have known that better than anyone." He looked toward the window. "The last part was my addition." I returned to my book. "Good addition," I said. The first project meeting took place 3 weeks later. The building looked exactly like an ordinary government office building. Which, technically, it was. It just contained something different from what most people imagined. I got through security quickly. My clearance was still valid, they said. 3rd floor. Conference room. 5 people around the table. Colonel Dmitriev turned out to be a short man in his mid-50s with an exceptionally straight back and the eyes of someone who had spent decades learning to evaluate people quickly and accurately. He shook my hand and pointed me toward a chair. 3 of the 5 people present were strangers. One wasn't. Sergei Mikhailovich Larin. We had worked together 10 years earlier. As it turned out, he was the one who had recommended me. He nodded when I entered. Briefly. The message required no words. I won't describe the work itself in detail. I'll only say that it was exactly what I expected: complex, demanding. The kind of work that required the specific style of thinking I had once trained for and quietly maintained ever since. Without practical application, perhaps. But maintained nonetheless. As it turned out, the ability had never left. It had simply been waiting. The first meeting lasted 3 hours. I asked 7 questions. I received answers to all of them. 4 answers satisfied me. 3 required clarification. I made 2 observations. Dmitriev wrote both of them down. On the way home, I realized that for the first time in a very long time, I hadn't thought about anything unrelated while working. It was complete engagement. The kind I remembered from years earlier. The kind I had missed, not as pain, but as a presence whose absence leaves behind a recognizable shape. I was home. Not in my apartment. Inside work that belonged to me. I couldn't tell Igor the details. But he saw me after that first meeting and understood something without words. Maybe it was the way I walked through the door. Maybe it was the expression people wear when they've returned from somewhere they truly needed to be. "How was it?" he asked. "Good." "Difficult?" "Yes." "Exactly the right amount." He nodded. Then he said, "You haven't changed." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You've always been like this," he said. I just stopped seeing it. Or maybe I started seeing only what was directly in front of me every day. I considered that. It happens, I said. To people who see each other every day. You begin to see the role instead of the person inside it. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed, but it is an explanation. He walked over and stopped beside me. Just a housewife, he said for the third time since that dinner. Each time differently. The first time carelessly. The second time quietly, with understanding. The third time as if he were finally putting down something he'd been carrying. Yes. I'm sorry. I forgive you. Not because I had been deeply wounded and was graciously forgiving pain. But because he had arrived at understanding honestly, without defensiveness or excuses. That deserves acknowledgement. Are you always like this? He asked. Like what? So precise. No unnecessary words. My father was a military surgeon, I said. It's hereditary. He laughed. A real laugh. A month after the project began, I visited my parents. My father, Andrei Nikolaevich Orlov, was 71 years old. Retired 3 years earlier. Living in Novosibirsk with my mother. Every morning he walked to buy a newspaper with the same precision he had once applied to everything else in life. My mother still fussed over him with the same loving restlessness she had during his years in the military. Back then she fussed because there was a reason, now she fussed because habit had outlived necessity. I told my father about the project. Not the details. Just the general outline. He listened while looking slightly away from me. That was his way of listening carefully. Looking elsewhere so he could focus entirely on what he was hearing. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "They found you themselves." Yes. That's how it should be. Simple. No embellishment. I looked at him. Did you know something like this would happen? No, he said. But I'm not surprised. Why? He turned toward me. Because you think the way people think when they're needed for a specific job. I met people like that during my service. Sooner or later, they're always found. I sat with that thought for a while. You never told me that. You never asked. Then he laughed. Quietly. Briefly. The way he always laughed. I laughed too. My mother entered carrying tea and looked at both of us with the expression she always wore when my father and I understood something she only suspected. What's so funny? She asked. Genetics, my father said. Tamara Nikolaevna came to visit at the end of the month. She visited every 6 to 8 weeks. It was a rhythm she had developed over the years, frequent enough to stay involved, infrequent enough not to become intrusive. This time, however, she arrived differently than usual. Igor met her downstairs while I put the kettle on. When they came up, I stepped into the hallway. She looked at me differently. Before, her gaze had always carried evaluation, the confidence of someone who believed she understood the situation. Now it was different. Not exactly respect. Not something so immediate. Simply, reconsideration. Natasha, she said. Tamara Nikolaevna. Igor told me, she said. About your work. About what you used to do. Yes. I didn't know. I know you didn't. She was silent for a moment. At that dinner. I asked. She didn't finish. You asked what you've always asked, I said. Nothing terrible. And Igor answered incorrectly. Yes. But he corrected it. She studied me for another second. You're not offended, she said. Not a question. An observation. No. Why? I thought about it. Because resentment requires someone else's opinion to define your reality, I said. You thought what you thought about me. That was your right. It didn't change who I was. She looked at me for a long time. Strong character, she said at last. My father was a military surgeon, I replied. It's hereditary. To my surprise, she laughed. Not politely. Not socially. A genuine laugh. There was something in it I had never heard before. We went into the kitchen. The conversation over tea that evening was different from any we'd had before. I want to tell you about something that happened later. 3 months after I started the project. We were working on a particular problem that I can't describe in detail. What I can say is that, at some point, my analysis revealed something nobody else had noticed. Not because they were less capable. Because I approached the data differently. From another angle. The angle formed by mathematical training and years of domestic life that had never really been just domestic life. Years spent reading. Thinking. Following developments. Keeping my mind sharp. Sergei Mikhailovich noticed it first. After the meeting ended, he remained behind while everyone else left. He stood by the window. I was gathering my papers. Good perspective, he said. The angle you found. Thank you. I never forgot you, he said. Not during those 10 years. I'd occasionally keep track of what became of you. I always thought it was a shame. I looked up. A shame what? That someone built the way you are was doing something other than what they were designed to do. He paused. Then Dmitriev asked whether I knew anyone with the right profile, and I mentioned you immediately. You took a risk, I said. 10 years is a long time. No, he replied. I've seen how you work. That doesn't disappear in 10 years. Either a person has it or doesn't. You have it. I finished gathering the papers. Thank you for remembering. It's part of my job, he said. To remember useful people. Then he left. I remained in the empty conference room for another minute. Outside, October Moscow stretched beneath gray skies. Wet rooftops. The last leaves clinging to branches. Rain threatening by evening. A man who knew I was valuable had remembered me for 10 years. A husband who saw me every day had not known. It wasn't a paradox. Just 2 different kinds of attention. One was professional. Focused. Able to see the essence beneath the surface. The other was domestic. Diffuse. It saw what was directly in front of it and mistook that for the whole picture. Both were real. Both had a right to exist. Only one of them understood that it was seeing only part of the story. 6 months into the project, Igor and I were having dinner together. No parents. No visitors. Just the 2 of us. And he asked something he had never asked before. What do you actually like about the work, he said. Not that it's important. What do you personally enjoy about it? I thought for a moment. The moment when you see structure in something that looked like chaos, I said. You stare at a huge set of data and see nothing. Then something shifts, not in the data, but in your mind, and suddenly you see it. The pattern. The shape beneath the surface. He listened. Have you always been like that? Yes. Even when? He stopped. Even when I stayed home? I finished for him. Yes. Yes, I said. I simply applied it to different things. To the children. To the household. To you. He looked at me. To me? You think I couldn't tell when work was overwhelming you even though you never said anything? Or when you weren't sleeping enough despite insisting everything was fine? I said. It's the same work. Different data. He was silent for a long time. I've never thought about it that way. I know. That's a lot. Yes. You did a lot of things nobody noticed. Unnoticed is not the same thing as unimportant. He nodded slowly. No, he said. It isn't. We finished dinner. Then we remained at the table for nearly 2 hours talking. Not about work. Not about the children. About things we hadn't discussed in years. How we met. What we once dreamed about. What we imagined for the next decade of our lives. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. There's one final thing I want to say. Not about the project. Not about the ministry. Not about Igor or my mother-in-law. About the word just. Just a housewife. Just raising children. Just managing a home. The word just carries a very specific meaning. It means, no more than. Only. Merely, nothing beyond that. It denies depth. It says, I see the surface, and the surface is all there is. For 15 years, other people described my life with that word. Just at home. Just children. Just the household. And throughout those same 15 years, I never stopped being a person with a mathematical education. A person with experience in classified analytical work. A person whose mind searched for structure inside chaos. I never stopped reading. Never stopped thinking. Never stopped being myself. The just existed only in the minds of people who looked at the surface and assumed there was nothing underneath. The people who once considered me valuable found me again. Not because I had changed. Because I hadn't. For 15 years, I did what I chose to do. Fully. Carefully. Well. And in the spaces between, I continued to think the way I always had. I kept my skills alive. Eventually, those skills found their moment. They always do, if you don't abandon them. One last thing. 6 months later, we were having dinner at Igor's parents' house. Tamara Nikolaevna had prepared the meal. She was an excellent cook, something I had always acknowledged. We sat down. Igor's father, Vladimir Ivanovich, a quiet man of few words, poured the wine. Tamara Nikolaevna raised her glass. To Natasha, she said. Whom we didn't know as well as we thought we did. Igor looked at his mother. Then at me. I looked back at Tamara Nikolaevna. Thank you, I said. Tell us something, she said. Whatever you're allowed to tell. About your work. I want to understand. For the first time in 3 years, she said, I want to understand. Not, what do you do all day? Not, why is that necessary? Not a question with an answer already hidden inside it. I want to understand. I lifted my glass. All right, I said. I'd be happy to. And I told them what I could. Not everything. But enough. Enough for them to see the shape beneath the surface. Tamara Nikolaevna listened with the expression people wear when their worldview is being revised. That isn't a quick process. But it had begun. And beginnings matter. Perhaps that was the most important thing I took from this story. Not the phone call. Not the look on Igor's face when he understood. Not even his apology. The moment my mother-in-law said, I want to understand. Because it meant she had started looking. And when people start looking, eventually they begin to see. And when they begin to see, one day they understand. That is enough. It has always been enough. After that, time does its work. And I do mine. The same way I always have. The only difference is that now, more people know. Though if I'm honest, that was never the important part.